as you make your way through life, it's important to be able to recognize when someone's lying to you. And it's important to be able to recognize when someone's trying to mislead you. And it's very important to recognize when someone's just bullshitting you. And so one of the big takeaways from this course, hopefully, will be that you'll have the ability to kind of distinguish between these different ways in which people might be abandoning the truth in one way or another when they talk to you, or when they make public statements or write articles or create advertisements or give speeches or whatever the case may be. But it's also the case that there's a lot of instances where people claim that something is a lie when it's just not. There's also lots of instances where these are becoming more and more common, where somebody will claim that something is bullshit when it's just not an instance of bullshit, at least, if we assume Frankfurt's kind of analysis of this particular important form of bullshit. So what we're going to do in this module of the course is we're going to look at 3 different essays. And each of these essays appears in an anthology, a book that's like a collection of essays entitled Bullshit and Philosophy. So these essays are all written by academics, most of them professional philosophers. And what we're going to see is that each of them gives examples of bullshit throughout the course of their paper that, it seems to me anyway, aren't at all cases of bullshit, at least according to the understanding of Frankfurt's analysis of bullshit that we've been discussing in this class. And it's not just that they claim that these are instances of bullshit when they're not, according to Frankfurt's analysis, but they actually are reacting to Frankfurt's analysis. So these are authors who have all read Frankfurt. They all have some sort of understanding about what kind of bullshit Frankfurt is talking about in his essay. But for one reason or another, and I'll say a little bit about this, they seem to fall into the trap of just mischaracterizing these examples that they discuss as being cases of bullshit when I just don't think that they are at all. And so sort of the takeaway that I want you to have from this module then is that just because somebody calls something bullshit doesn't mean it is. And just because somebody calls something a lie doesn't mean it is. And hopefully you've developed the ability in this class, and you now have the tools at your disposal to carefully think about these cases and assess whether or not it really is an instance of bullshit, or it really is a lie, or it really is a case of misleading based on your deeper understanding of the nature of these things. So in this particular essay, or sorry, in this particular video, we're going to start with an essay called entitled On Bullshit Mania by Reisch Hardcastle. And so we're going to talk about 2 examples that they give pretty early on in their essay. So in the second section of their essay is entitled The Year in Bullshit. So if you look at the second section, it's called The Year in Bullshit. And so then what they do is they go through the different paragraphs of that second section of their essay. Is they're talking about different examples of bullshit that they have kind of found kind of in popular culture. So they're just sort of listing all of these relatively famous examples of what they think are bullshit that we've seen. And so I want to focus on 2 of those examples here in this video, and then bring our understanding of at least Frankfurt's understanding of bullshit, to bear on these examples. So one of the examples they discuss is the James Frey case. So just quick background here. James Frey wrote a book called A Million Little Pieces. And this is, we now know, clearly a work of fiction, right? Most of it's just sort of made up. It's just a work of fiction. But when James Frey originally published the book, A Million Little Pieces, he claimed it was a work of nonfiction, right? He claimed that it was depicting sort of true events. So Reisch and Hardcastle, in their essay here, are putting this forward as an example of bullshit. They're saying Frey is bullshitting us, basically, by publishing this work of fiction and then sort of claiming that it's actually a work of nonfiction. So let's think about that. Are they right that this is an instance of bullshit, at least in Frankfurt's sense, as we've discussed it? So let's try to make this question as concrete as possible, because it's not entirely clear what Reisch and Hardcastle are saying the bullshit is here in this case. But I think there's two possibilities. Maybe they mean one of them, maybe they mean both, I don't know. So we'll just consider both of them. So here's one possibility. So here's James Frey, and he says, my book is nonfiction, right? When you originally publish it, is that he publishes it as a work of nonfiction. He says it's nonfiction. So we can take his assertion that his book, A Million Little Pieces, is a work of nonfiction. Is that bullshit when he says that? Or another possibility is that we could, maybe Reisch and Hardcastle are saying that the specific claims that are being made in the book itself are actually bullshit because they're just fiction. So let's make this a really concrete example. What I've done is I went and I found the book, and I just kind of reproduced here for you. These are the first 3 sentences of his book. This is how his book begins. He writes, I wake to the drone of an airplane engine and the feeling of something warm dripping down my chin. I lift my head to feel my face. Sorry, I lift my hand to feel my face. My front 4 teeth are gone. I have a hole in my cheek. My nose is broken, and my eyes are swollen shut. So maybe what Reisch and Hardcastle are saying is that these claims, these assertions that are being made here in the text itself, are actually examples of bullshit, that Frey is bullshitting us when he makes these claims because they didn't actually happen. So let's take these 2 examples in turn. Notice that when Frey says my book is nonfiction, that assertion that he's making is just untruthful, right? So he believes it's false that A Million Little Pieces is a nonfiction work. He knows it's fiction. He's the one that wrote it, right? So that means that the assertion is something that he believes is false. So given our terminology in this class, that means it's untruthful. So notice right away, given Frankfurt's analysis, or at least our understanding of his analysis, right? This is not bullshit, right? It's not bullshit because remember that part of the very essence of bullshit, according to Frankfurt, is that the bullshitter is asserting something that is neither truthful nor untruthful. The bullshitter is asserting something that he or she doesn't believe is true and doesn't believe is false. They just have no idea whether it's true or false. But this isn't the case when Frey says my book is nonfiction. It's not like he doesn't know whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Of course he does. He knows it's fiction. So when he asserts that it's nonfiction, this is just not bullshit because it doesn't meet that first condition of being bullshit. It's actually a lie, right? So when Frey says my book is nonfiction, this is just a flat out lie, right? Because he's asserting that it's true. He's addressing a particular audience, namely all the people that are going to be reading the book. It's totally untruthful, right? He believes it's false, and he's trying to deceive people into actually thinking that it is nonfiction. So it checks off all the boxes. It just seems to me that this is just a straightforward lie, and that Reisch and Hardcastle are just mischaracterizing it as bullshit. I think the second instance here is also a case of something that's not bullshit because it's not truthful. So if we take the first, 3 sentences here and all the propositions that are being asserted in these first 3 sentences here, and we ask ourselves, well, is that bullshit? I think the answer again is no. And the reason it's not bullshit is because these assertions that are being made here are not, they're totally untruthful, right? Frey knows that he didn't wake up in an airplane with his 4 front teeth missing, a hole in his cheek, and a broken nose. He knows that this never happened to him. So when he claims that it happened to him in these propositions that are being asserted here, he's just saying something that he knows is false, something that he believes is false. So these are untruthful assertions. So that means that by definition, right, this is not bullshit, because bullshit is neither truthful nor untruthful. So if he's claiming, he's putting this book forward as a work of nonfiction, and then he writes this, he's basically claiming when he says these things that these things actually happened to him. And if they didn't, well, then he's just lying, right? This checks off all the boxes of a lie. He's asserting something to the audience that's untruthful with the intention of trying to get them to believe that these things actually happened to him when they didn't. And so this is just another lie. So again, I think that Reisch and Hardcastle mischaracterize what's happening here as bullshit when it's actually just lies. So here's a second example that they mention in the exact same paragraph on page 9, I think it is. So this is the case of J.T. Leroy. So this case is sort of similar to the James Frey case, but it adds another element to it. So there were 3 books that were published by this author, J.T. Leroy, and all of them were presented as autobiographical memoirs. So when Leroy published all 3 of these books, the claim was, these are works of nonfiction. These depict actual events that happened to me, right? They're autobiographical memoirs. And so let's just take one of these books. One of these books was entitled Sarah. And Sarah is the name of Leroy's mother. So here's what we now know about J.T. Leroy's fictional books. What we know is that they're all fictional, right? So just like Frey, Leroy said, these books are nonfiction, they're autobiographical memoirs. Well, that just wasn't true. They're actually just all made up, just like Frey's book was made up. So this book, Sarah, for example, is mostly a work of fiction, even though J.T. Leroy, when it was published, said, this is nonfiction, it's an autobiographical memoir. Second, and here's the difference between this case and the Frey case, J.T. Leroy doesn't even exist. So the author is a fabrication. So the name of the author is actually Laura Elbert. So Laura Elbert is the woman who wrote all 3 of these books under the pseudonym J.T. Leroy. Now, just having a pseudonym isn't necessarily very interesting. There's lots of authors that write under pseudonyms, but she went much further than this. So when she would have phone calls with people, she would pretend to be J.T. Leroy on the other end of the line. When she would have email exchanges with people about her book, she would pretend to be J.T. Leroy in her email exchanges with people. So she wasn't just using a pseudonym here. She was literally taking on the persona of and pretending to be this person who wrote these books, when in fact she was the one that wrote the books, and this person is just entirely made up. Okay. So Reisch and Hardcastle say that Laura Elbert is bullshitting, right? That when she makes up this fake persona, this fake author, and then writes a book that's entirely fictional, but pawns it off on us as being an autobiographical memoir, she's just bullshitting us, and they present it in that kind of way. So we're in a position to assess what Reisch and Hardcastle are saying here. Is this really bullshit? Let's break it down into 2 specific examples so that we can be really concrete. So one example would be when Laura Elbert is talking on the phone with somebody who calls, and she says, I'm JT Leroy, right? She claims to be this person that actually doesn't exist. So is she bullshitting when she says that? And then another possibility would be we could consider Elbert's claim when she says, assuming she says something like this, my book, Sarah, is an autobiographical memoir. So we can consider her claim that she is Leroy, and we can consider her claim that the book is an autobiographical memoir, that it's a work of nonfiction. So are either of these bullshit? I don't think so. So think about her claim that she's JT Leroy. Does she believe that that's false? Yeah, she does. She knows that she's Laura Elbert. She knows that she's not JT Leroy. She knows that it's just made up. So when she asserts, I'm JT Leroy, she's actually asserting an untruthful proposition. So by definition, she's not bullshitting, right? You're only bullshitting when you assert something and you don't know whether it's true or not. Well, she's asserting something that she knows is false, so there's no way it's bullshit. In fact, it's just a lie, right? I mean, she's asserting something that's untruthful with the intention of trying to get people to believe that it's truthful. So it's the very definition of a lie. So it seems to me that Reisch and Hardcastle, again, are just mischaracterizing a lie here as bullshit. Same thing with the other possible example that we could focus on here. When Elbert says, my book, Sarah, is an autobiographical memoir, it's just another untruthful assertion, right? She knows it's not autobiographical. She knows it's complete fiction. She knows that she made it all up. So since her assertion is untruthful, it can't possibly be bullshit. It doesn't meet the definition. And in fact, it's just another lie. She's asserting that it's an autobiographical memoir with the intention of getting us to believe that it is when she knows that it's not. So let me finish this video then by just saying something about why I suspect that maybe it is that Reisch and Hardcastle are sort of making this mistake here. I think it has to do with the phenomenon of making things up. And you've heard me characterize bullshit multiple times already as making things up. The problem, and I think it's unquestionably true that all bullshit is made up, right? So when you bullshit, you say something and you have no idea whether it's true or not. So by definition, if you don't know whether it's true or not, you must be just sort of making it up without having any idea whether or not it corresponds to reality. So there's no question that bullshit is made up. The problem is that there's other things that are made up that are not bullshit. So all bullshit is made up, but just because something is made up doesn't necessarily make it a case of bullshit. And I think that that's relatively easy to see when we compare bullshitting to lying, right? So consider 2 ways in which you might make up something. You might make up something when you know that what you're making up is not true, right? You believe it's false. So my mother calls me and she asks me what I did yesterday. And I make up something that I know I didn't do. I say, I went to Disneyland yesterday, right? And I know I didn't, right? I'm sitting at home in quarantine here, right? So, there, when I lie to her, right? That's just a lie, right? When I lie to her and say I went to Disneyland when I know that I didn't, and I'm trying to get her to believe that I did, I'm lying, even though I'm just making up something. So if I make up something and I believe it's not true, then that's just a lie, right? But if I make up something and I have no idea whether what I'm making up is true or false, then that's an instance of bullshit. So the very essence of what bullshit is, or part of the essence of what bullshit is that you make up something precisely when you don't know whether what you're saying is true or false. So what I'm trying to say here is that I think that maybe what's sort of leading Reisch and Hardcastle to classify these two examples as being bullshit, when I think it's pretty clear that they're not, is that I think that they are perhaps sort of mistakenly just thinking of bullshit as being when people just make stuff up. And but again, the problem is that you can make stuff up and be lying. You can make stuff up and be bullshitting. And they've picked two examples where I think, Albert and Frey are making things up, but the things that they're making up are lies because they know that they're actually false. And they would only be cases of bullshit if the things that they were making up were things that they had, no idea whether they were true or false.